Hello, everyone, and welcome back to David Berry 75's channel. And I'm Toni, your guest reader, and we're going to continue on reading John Baines' The Stellar Man. And we are at Chapter 4, The Collective Soul of the Species. Aristotle defined a slave as an animated, malleable instrument. This terrifying description has never been more true than it is today. If applied to human beings in general, the individual is merely an appendage and a sounding board for the species. Homo sapiens is the same as other animal species. He has collected souls, which regulates and directs the evolution of the human race. The collective soul produces the migration of birds, regulates reproduction, directs different changes and adaptations, brings about periods of mating, and in general directs the instinctive behavior of the beast. As he belongs to the animal kingdom, Sapiens is not free from the directing force, which is in effect controls, directs, supervises, and regulates the species, acting as a common brain, which stifles individual thought. This common soul has been called the collective unconscious by Jung. He did not talk of an animal soul, but he certainly possessed this knowledge. The collective unconscious is in truth the animal soul of sapiens. The mere fact of understanding, accepting, and comprehending the significance of this subject means visualizing the most important foundations of sapiens' life. Because the bestial impulse acts as the basic motive of its actions, personality is merely a reflection of the common soul, which shapes the subject's psyche with unsuspected power. It is no more than an emanation from the common deposit, which is incorporated and personalized in an individual who thus acquires, if it is possible to use this expression, an animal soul of his own in miniature and distinguished from the great collective soul. In this way, the individual receives from his parents a physical and genetic inheritance, and from humanity the legacy of power and animal intelligence. Under these circumstances, it is very difficult for the individual to overcome this overwhelming compulsion and shape his own individual personality. He must resign himself to sharing the common fate of his fellow men, unless he is lucky enough to reach a Hermetic school. Hermetic philosophy maintains that there can be no true spiritual and moral progress if man does not cut the umbilical cord which ties him to the central computer of the species, which nourishes bestial characteristics. This notable and unique event is far-reaching and irreversible, and takes place in the heart of true Hermetic schools. Other schools do not in any way deal with animal soul of the student and are limited to only transmitting certain teachings, which doubtlessly will be used to further bestializing his intelligence. The bestialization of intelligence is a common phenomena in this age. The more intelligent an individual is, the more powerful his beast will be, and the beast will use this intellect to satisfy its own instinct without any concern for anything else. The collective program or collective soul, based on the fierce and inhuman rivalry, obliges the individual to kill in order to eat. Death has many degrees, and physical destruction is the last of them. But before this, there is the slow decline that is a result of destruction of one's inner longings. We may kill by annihilating the will of others, or pitilessly exploiting them, returning evil for evil, destroying their love, their sanity, happiness, and peace, or slandering, insulting, or being isolated, hard-hearted towards others' problems. The future of the human race does not look promising. The accelerated development of a cold and inhuman intelligence without love or spiritual content, progress is creating intelligent giants, but spiritual pygmies with conscious and human sensitivity, atrophied by a vast cerebral and cultural program designed ultimately to serve the central computer of the species. The only possibility for salvation is in the hands of the isolated individual, that is, in the one who, by means of hermeticism, attains vital autonomy, disentangling himself from the central brain. Unfortunately, not everyone can be saved, since along with the extinction of sapiens species, the cessation of the operation of the central computer, there would arise a cosmic imbalance as the central computer fulfills the functions necessarily for the planetary harmony of our system. What is the future of those who cannot save themselves? Nothing dramatic or spectacular. Some could reincarnate and then slowly evolve through many lives, and others would disintegrate. That is, they would have the kind of death which awaits the majority of materialistic people who believe they all come to an end in the grave. The Oniric web, which imprisons men, is tremendously subtle and complex, but at the same time brutally evident once one learns to observe specific phenomena of social psychology. Even when searching for something superior, people go around in a vicious circle of behavioral standards dictated by culture. The more they study, the less they know, and the less they understand. All their efforts are capitalized on by the central computer, which channels them into a community cultural fund. How did this central computer originate? It was formed gradually, ever since the first existence of man on Earth, by the action of the environment of his psyche. It is the offspring of the emanations of God and the emanations of man. It will continue growing and perfecting itself by virtue of the life of man himself, but will survive man. And this force, which we call the collective unconscious or central computer, does not need material or biological support to continue its existence once it has been created. Ideological and mental speaking, the individual does not exist as he is inseparable from culture. He is governed by the behavioral standards accepted by society, which ultimately are controlled by the central computer. Thus, culture, which is the same in some ways can do so much good for man, in other ways can be considered as the veritable murderer of the divine spark or freedom and of awareness. Cultural culture engages, limits, obliges, impels, hypnotizes, and possesses the individual with irresistible power, shaping him in accordance with one single pattern. This pattern is established as a prototype for the production of robot men who are the slaves. The central computer needs to keep the spectacle of life moving. In a sick society such as ours, we will undoubtedly have a sick culture, one alienated by collective stereotypes. Our society is truly sick, and with this society, we live out of satanic dreams worthy of the divine comedy. Each being contains a world of problems and conflicts. Fortunately or unfortunately, man blunts his higher faculties and is not aware of all the horror of his existence in a mad world. A popular aphorism says, "In the land of the blind, the one-eyed man is king." Something similar is happening to our civilization, where the higher forms of government and community guidance are not submitted to any type of state control. We are guided to a greater or lesser extent by the individuals, who about whose degree of sanity or mental illness we are totally unaware. It is sufficient that an individual should appear to be normal and he will be accepted as such. We are all aware that mental disturbances are some of the most difficult phenomena to discover and evaluate. Even by specialized professionals, it is impossible for the ordinary man in the street to perceive this madness. It seems incredible that in a civilization said to be advanced, such as important subjects have been neglected. As we know, it is a small group of men who govern the great masses. How many of these forming parts of this group are leaders are disturbed with serious problems? 30% or perhaps 50% or maybe the great majority. How does one evaluate the damage that implies for humanity? It would not be of great significance if serious mental disturbances occurred in these people not holding public office or important positions. On the other hand, for those whose range of social action is very wide, it seems absurd or irrational that they should not be obliged to undergo a periodic evaluation of their mental and psychological health. At this time, it is perfectly possible that the judge who the judge who administrates justice is one's local area could be mentally disturbed. The possibility cannot be disputed by any psychiatrist, as mental illness is rare, blatant, or spectacular, but instead is rather sly, hidden, and insidious. In fact, it is well known that there is scarcely anyone who does not have pathological traits in the way of their mind's work. The gravity of these factors is overlooked. The case of the aforementioned judge, if he indeed had truly serious mental problems, would represent a horrifying example of someone who was mentally ill, authorized by the society to manipulate people, administrating justice in accordance with his complexes, frustrations, manias, and traumas. One can object that a judge only follows the letter of the law, but perspective analyze will show that codes of law can be interpreted in many different personal ways. At this point, we should ask ourselves how many paranoid judges there are in the world who totally ignore the sacred impartiality of the law. How many important public officials are victims of hysteria, megalomania, egocentrism, unbridled yearning for power, sadism, and or a total lack of self-criticism. There is no provision for screening those who, by virtue of their positions, are affected by the phenomenon of psychological inflation due to the prestige that their position confers upon them. The term psychological inflation, coined by Jung, describes the disorientation experienced by a person when he identifies himself with the position he occupies and is led astray in his self-evaluation. In this way, a physician could inflate or rise himself to the high level of importance and dignity which society confers on a doctor due to his professional title. But a person is not what his title or position represents. He is merely a person who cannot claim for himself the importance or the grandeur granted to the medical professions in general, because thousands of people belong to this profession. Without realizing this, the person subject to inflation tries to usurp or attribute to himself alone the force, power, and importance which does not belong to him, but which is actually granted by society. We know there is no psychological control, that inevitably thousands of innocent victims pay in different ways for the insanity of those in charge of administrating our civilization. Legal errors, abuse of power, fatal political mistakes, which degenerates into armed conflict, the absurdity of power by financial mafias, obsolete or erroneous education, educational systems. All of this is in some way provoked by the mental disturbed. Included among these cases are the sick humans who sell their honor, their dignity, decency, and their person for monetary rewards. It is also true that there are successes, beneficial discoveries, and very positive works, but unfortunately, for one reason or another, these works rarely produce results that are decisively positive for the world. This process is analogous to healing the branches of a tree while the trunk and the roots are rooting. Therefore, no scientific event or discovery will be far reaching and importance until human nature is changed and rise to a higher level. On the other hand, even small pebbles make a mountain after eons of time. In order to understand this, it must be accepted that there will be no real progress and evolution until human nature changes. It is precisely this grand work to which the great Hermetic initiates are pledged, and it is for this reason that there are true Hermetic schools where people are given an opportunity to elevate themselves, to have a wider understanding of the functional mechanism of the collective soul or central computer. It is necessary to analyze the psychological event of the masses. This will enable us to verify the hidden action of a certain type of force, which takes possession of people under certain circumstances. If the following relevant extracts from Gustave Le Bon's work, The Crowd, he states, in its ordinary sense, the word crowd represents a gathering of individuals of whatever nationality, profession, or sex, and whatever may be the chances that have brought them together. From the psychological point of view, the expression crowd assumes quite a different meaning. Given certain circumstances, and only under these circumstances, an agglomeration of men present characteristics very different from those of the individuals composing it. The sentiments are ideas of all the persons in the gathering take one and the same direction, and their conscious personality vanishes. A collective soul is formed, without a doubt, but displays a very clearly defined characteristic. The gathering has thus become what, in the absence of a better expression, I will call an organized crowd, or, if the term is considered preferable, a psychological crowd. It forms a single being and is subject to the law of the mental unity of crowds. It is described in this description by Le Bon. It can be seen how the central computer acts with force in grouping people into psychological crowds or masses. Nevertheless, a mass may be composed of 2, 3, 5, or 40 people, as the psychological meaning of crowds or masses is different from the common one. When a person has developed a strong individuality, he is less sensitive to this corrosion of the masses. Le Bon continues, in this case, of everything that belongs to the realm of sentiment, religion, politics, mortality, affection, and antipathies, etc., the most eminent men seldom surpass the standards of the most ordinary individuals. From the intellectual point of view, an abyss may exist between a great mathematician and his bootmaker, but from the point of view of a character, the difference is most often slight or non existent. in the collective mind, the intellectual aptitudes of the individuals, and as a consequence, their individualities are weakened. The heterogeneous is swamped by the homogeneous, and the unconscious qualities obtain the upper hand. The very fact that crowds possess common ordinary qualities explains why they can never accomplish acts demanding a high degree of intelligence. The decision affecting matters of general interest come to by an assembly of men of distinction. But specialists in different walks of life are not sensibly superior to their decisions that would be adopted by a gathering of imbeciles. The truth is, they can only bring to bear in common on the work at hand those mediocre qualities which are the birthright of every average individual. In crowds, it is stupidity and not mother wit that is accumulated. We see then that the disappearance of the conscious personality, the predominance of the unconscious personality, the turning by means of suggestion and contagion of feeling and ideas is an identical direction. The tendency immediately to transform the suggested idea into acts. These, we see, are the principal characteristics of the individual forming part of a crowd. He is no longer himself, but has become an automation who has ceased to be guided by his will. Moreover, by the mere fact that he forms part of an organized crowd, a man descends several rungs on the ladder of civilization. He further states, crowds exhibit a docile respect for force and are but slightly impressed by kindness, which for them is scarcely other than a form of weakness. Their sympathies have never been bestowed on easygoing masters, but on tyrants who vigorously oppress them. It is to these latter that they always erect the loftiest statues. It is true that they are willingly trample on the despots whom they have stripped of his power, but it is because, having lost his strength, he has resumed his place among the people, who are to be despised because they are not to be feared. A crowd is always ready to revolt against a weak authority and bow down servingly before a strong one. Should the strength of an authority be intermittent, the crowd, always obedient to its extreme sentiments, passes alternately from anarchy to servitude, from servitude to anarchy. However, to believe in a predominance among crowds of revolutionary instinct would be to entirely misconstrue their psychology. It is merely their tendency to violence that deceives us on this point. Their rebellious and destructive outbursts are always very transitory. Crowds are governed too much by unconscious consideration, and a consequence subject too much to secular hereditary influences to not be extremely conservative. Abandoned to themselves, they soon weary of disorder and instinctively turn to servitude. From Laban's skillful description, we can see how the central computer manipulates people, converting them into puppets in the service of an established plan. What plan? The evolutionary plan for sapiens, which must adjust to certain rules of the game. The general rules are the following. Number one, considered collectively as a species, sapiens is not and cannot be free. Number two, sapiens must be born, suffer, love, become sick, and die, reproduce, build up civilizations, and destroy them, only for the benefit of invisible superior powers to capitalize on his vital product. Doesn't sapiens profit from other animal species? Are there not animals which exclusively to feed sapiens. Mineral feed upon cosmic rays, planets on minerals, animals on plants. Man feeds on all these, and the gods feed on man. Number 3, sapiens is therefore a slave in perpetuity. Nevertheless, individual or isolated beings separate from the group may become free. Number 4, the only possible freedom is liberation from the central computer, and the only way to attain this is by conquering and surpassing oneself. Number 5, sapiens is obliged to comply with the rules of the game in the system to which he has been assigned. Number 6, the evolution of sapiens comes inevitably with time, but measured in cosmic, not terrestrial time. Perhaps he may have to wait millions of terrestrial years in order to reach perfection. Number 7, there is no evolution of the sapient individual, only that of the species, as stated above. If a sapient individual desires to evolve, he must convert himself into a mutant human for whom evolution exists. Number 8, there are other rules of the game, but only those already indicated can be revealed at this time. In order to explain the modus operandi of Sapiens' plan, the hierarchy of the operating forces will be explained. The diagram that follows endeavors only to briefly describe the basic forces which act in the universe. God, the creator, in his double manifestation of life and death, light and darkness, of the sleep state and the state of vigilance, abases his power until able to act concretely through certain angels who direct the evolutionary plan. Hermetic tradition calls them the Archons, or Lords of Destiny, which, with reference to sapiens, this plan is maintained by virtue of dream energy and can be seen in diagram 1. Nevertheless, the divine irradiations of luminous energy, which we call vigilance, reaches the planet Earth, but is not manifested in sapiens. Sleep energy, directed or manipulated by the Archons, maintains the program of the system, even down to the smallest group, the family. Those who have eyes to see and ears to hear will draw incalculable advantages from the comprehension of this system. To give a concrete example, this master key can be used to explain certain strange events in the life of Jesus, which is this light, appear rational and crystal clear. Why did Jesus appear to be so tremendously antagonistic towards the family? Recall his words, I have come to set a man against his father, and a daughter against her mother, and the daughter-in-law against her mother-in-law, and the enemies of man should be their own families. He who loves his father or mother more than he loves me is not worthy of me, and he who loves his son or daughter more than me is not worthy of me. When Jesus was told that his mother and brothers were outside and wished to speak to him, he replied, who is my mother? Who are my brothers? And he stretched out that his hands toward his disciples, saying, here are my mother and my brothers. When one of these disciples asked him for leave to bury his father, Jesus said, follow me and let the dead bury their dead. Strange words for one who preached of love. Nevertheless, the explanation is simple. Look at diagram 1. It can be seen that the family is the ultimate nucleus that maintains dream or hypnotic energy, the instrument of sapiens, slavery to animal unconsciousness. Thus, if Jesus wished his disciples to see the light, to awaken and evolve, but by necessity, they had to break the chain of sleep. Of course, it is understood that this example can be applied solely to those who wish to forever follow a path towards spiritual advancement, leaving the world aside and foregoing human affection, as must have been the case with the 12 apostles. It is also necessary to understand that two families may exist: the animal family of sapiens and the divine family, human. Needless to say, any family which, by virtue of the spiritual advancement of its members, becomes free from the action of sleep, is in truth converted into a divine family. The family nucleus should be solidly united, not by monarch forces or blood ties, but by an authentic spiritual communion. Regarding material freedoms, sapiens will greatly progress and without doubt will someday free himself from the biblical saying, "You will earn your bread by the sweat of your brow." The advance of science and its techniques allows us to surmise or foresee that the working day will shorten in proportion to the degree of automation achieved by specialized machines, robots, which undertake the heavy work previously accomplished by men. Also foreseeable are extraordinary medical advances and the appearance of new inventions, which will make life on Earth more pleasant. And let me just finish the. Well, let's look at the drawing for a second here before I continue on. So you can see the drawing. Alright. And that's diagram 1. And more agreeable. If these advances are not parallel to an increase in the level of awareness of humanity, they will lead to a state of civilized barbarianism. Our descendants will be extraordinarily intelligent barbarians, possessors of advanced technology, but with the progressive atrophying of their muscle and their spiritual consciousness, the phenomenon of psychological inflation made known by Jung, to whom we have already referred, strongly affected common man. He identifies with science, art, culture, technological progress, and the civilization, and absorbs them, confusing them with himself. Thus, he loses sight of himself and lives on a level of importance and qualifications entirely beyond him, and which is truth corresponds to the sum total of the effort of man since his existence upon earth. By means of the psychological trick, he multiplies his own worth by millions, and the result is a deep satisfaction with his self-esteem. In order to analyze a person and judge his individual value, we must always divest him of all the honors, dignities, inheritance, authority, and privileges which society has conferred on him. Unfortunately, our analysts will be very discouraging, for in the majority of cases within the inflated being, we will not find the human being which this covering hides. He has died, devoured by life itself, or perhaps he has never existed in the first place. It is for this reason that a human being always hides behind numerous masks and disguises, for in this way his absolute insignificance goes unnoticed. The smaller an individual is, the more he endeavors to inflate himself, to appear important in the eyes of others, and thus rise his self-esteem. Psychology asserts that the most profound principle of human nature is the desire to be appreciated, and therefore there exists a demand for self-exaltation It is said that the experience most sought after by men is the increase of his self esteem, and the trait most difficult to eradicate is vanity. In personality, a psychological interpretation, Dr. Gordon Alport states the following regarding self esteem. Whatever the ultimate character of this principle, its cruder forms of expression results in extraordinary strategies of conduct. It alone is responsible for the great superstructure of masquerade built up in every life, all in the interest of self esteem. One may cover one true emotions, uh, put on a front, and at considerable cost avoid exposing one's weakness. The persona that develops protects one from unwelcome narcissistic wounds. What is even more spectacular, likewise in the interest of self esteem, is the capacity men have for deceiving themselves. The technique of self deception are numerous. Psychological usage group them all under the single title of rationalization, a term signifying, of course, precisely the opposite of reason. Reason fits one's impulses and beliefs in the world of reality. Realization fits one concept of reality to one's impulses and beliefs. Or, as the aphorism has it, reasoning discovers real reasons, and rationalization, good reasons for what we do. We can observe how an individual regards his own I or ego and tries by all means to put the greatest possible distance between that I and the surrounding reality. The more buffers which exist between the person and the world, the more peaceful he will sleep. He will then withdraw substantially from reality, seeing it from afar as a vague inkling through the veil of his protective mechanism, otherwise known as personality and its function. Personality is in the service of the individual's program. Furthermore, it forms part of this program and is the psychological mechanism destined to maintain and reinforce it. The study of the mechanisms of the personality is invaluable in understanding the operating system of the central computer. The collective soul, or central computer, personality, culture, society, mass movements, education, publicity, television, and the press. All these are powerful tools in the service of hypnosis. There are a select minority of beings who, by their personal efforts, are able to stand out from the mass and excel for different reasons. They may belong to an intellectual and hereditary or financial aristocracy, but in the final analysis, they serve the central computer with the same docility as the masses. The only difference being that they are better rewarded for their service. Great human differences are essential, very superficial, as people react in more or less the same way internally. Of course, the chosen also exist. They are privileged men intellectually whose intellectual depth enables them to a certain extent to surpass the barriers of what is superficial and apparent. They are individuals who, for one reason or another, better resist the hypnotic influence of dream energy. Nevertheless, their writings, words, and speeches are lost in the vacuum of a deluded multitude. The difficulty in fathoming and understanding concepts which are not habitually used makes it practically impossible for a person to evaluate the tremendous importance that the collective soul has in the life of a human being. In order to truly comprehend the significance of this fact, it is sufficient to consider that we are only a vital emanation of the collective soul, a structure without any autonomy or a life of our own. In the light of this truth, we can understand many psychological phenomena which are not very clear, but which are deceivingly important in human, decisively important in human life. Take the example anxiety, which is the hidden reason for many of man's acts in the art of loving. Enric Fromm maintained that the experience of separateness arouses anxiety. It is indeed the source of all anxiety. Being separate means being cut off without any capacity to use my human powers. The awareness of human separation without reunion by love is the source of shame. It is at the same time the source of guilt and anxiety. The deepest need of man, then, is the need to overcome his separateness, to leave the prison of his aloneness. We must ask ourselves, why is there such a fear of isolation? Isolation from what? Obviously, the necessity of union corresponds to the tie with the collective soul or central computer. All attempts or possibilities of separation by virtue of the external and the internal influences produces panic, and this panic is expressed by the human animal when threatened with separation from the flock. Reflecting on this, we can understand the scope of the alignment which affects Sapiens. Not only does he not want to be human, but he senses profound anguish when threatened with the abandonment of his animal condition. For this reason, anguished sapiens have invented certain tricks or flawed and artificial solutions, which enables him to temporarily uh, placate his deep fear. Fromm speaks of the following attempt to escape the state of separation. Number one, orgastic states. One way of achieving this aim lies in all kinds of orgastic states. These may have the form of an auto-induced trance, sometimes with the help of drugs. Many rituals of primitive tribes offer a vivid picture of this type of solution. In a transitory state of exaltation, the world outside disappears, and with it the feeling of separateness from it. Inasmuch as these rituals are practiced in common, an experience of fusion with the group is added, which make the solutions all the more effective. Such orgastic states may be brought about with drugs, certain rituals by alcohol, or by sexual experience. Although rituals of primitive tribes offer this kind of solution, the same solution is also present in more civilized society in religious rituals, which produce an experience of fusion with the group and with the divinity who forgives the sin and rewards the believer, granting him a state of grace. Fromm continues, alcoholism and drug addiction are the forms which the individual chooses in non-orgastic culture. In contrast to those participating in the social pattern solutions, such as individuals suffer from guilt, feelings, and remorse, while they try to escape from separateness by taking refuge in alcohol or drugs. They feel all the more separate after the orgastic experience is over, and thus are driven to recourse to it with increasing frequency and intensity. Number two, conformity with the group. Also, in contemporary Western society, union with the group is the prevalent way of overcoming separateness. It is a union in which the individual self disappears to a large extent, and where the aim is to belong to the herd. If I am like everybody else, if I have no feeling or thoughts which make me different, if I conform in custom, dress, and ideas to the pattern of the group, I am saved from the frightening experience of aloneness. Nevertheless, the price is paid in a very high, uh, as it involved freedom and individuality. Furthermore, as stated by Fromm, union by conformity is not intense or violent. It is sincerity dictated by routine, and due to this, at times is insufficient to elevate the anguish of separation. And then comes the need to indulge in orgastic practices. Fromm is of this opinion that flock-like conformity only offers the advantage of being permanent and not spasmodic, as the individual is introduced to the conformity patterns of 3 to 4 years of age, and from that moment never loses contact with the flock. He even anticipates his funeral at the last event of social importance, remaining strict within the pattern. Number 3, creative activity. In any kind of creative work, the person creating unites himself with his material, which presents the world outside himself. Whether a carpenter makes a table or a goldsmith a piece of jewelry, whether the peasant grows his corn or the painter paints a picture. In all types of creative work, the worker and his object become one. Man unites himself with the world in the process of creation. The unity achieved in productive work is not interpersonal. The unity achieved is orgastic fusion and transitory. The unity achieved by the conformity is only pseudo unity. Hence, they are only partial answers to the problem of existence. The full answer lies in the achievement of the interpersonal union or fusion with another person in love. Number 4, union by love. This complete solution can only be reached when there is genuine love and not just a passional or symbiotic union. A passional union is one in which a person is a slave to passion, and reality his activity is a passiveness, because he is impelled, and it is he who undergoes the act, that not he who accomplishes it. A symbiotic union is produced when there is a dependence in which both need each other mutually and absorb each other reciprocally. It is a form of vampirism or parasitism. Fromm describes genuine love very clearly. Union by love is only valid when there is mature love. That is a union that allows and maintains individualism. In contrast to symbiotic union, mature love is union under the conditions of preserving one's integrity, one's individuality. Love is an active power in man, a power which breaks through the walls, which separates man from his fellow men, which unites him with others. Love makes him overcome the sense of isolation and separateness, yet it permits him to be himself, to retain his integrity. In love, the paradox occurs that two beings become one and yet remain two. From this profound description by Fromm, we see Sapiens' main motivation in life. His deep anguish is based on the fear of freedom with respect to the central computer. Using the master key of knowledge of this collective soul of Sapiens, the reader could well analyze any aspect of social psychology, whether it be love, politics, war, art, morals, justice, or injustice. Everything can be understood through a prior knowledge of the mystery of the central computer. After reading this far, many readers may be puzzled, as perhaps they expected more magic, mystery, and occultism. Perhaps they desired the revelation of fantastic secrets, which would enable them to unfold with a simple abracadabra or obtain clairvoyance with the opening of the third eye. Patience. The most impatient and superficial person is one who sees least. Only the one who senses that great truth is found in that which is simple will be able to see beneath the surface of appearances. People always seek that which is complicated, believing there is an equivalence between complexity and truth. If we meditate deeply, we will find it is much more difficult to notice the simple than the complex. That which is simple appears so unattractive that no one bothers to study it or make an effort to delve beneath its surface. Nevertheless, truth is that which is truth is in that which is simple, and for this reason it is said that truth is written in the open book of nature. Truth is strewn everywhere and no one notices it. It is more difficult to know what is already known than to learn something of which one is ignorant. The already known merits no attention, and in any event is tainted with prejudices. It is for this reason that true intellect is hidden away in the attic of the insignificant and useless, scorning the profound treasure it if may contain. The mystery of occultism and magic is based on understanding that is already known for everyone, but which no one understands. For this reason, the common man wanders about lost and disoriented, endeavoring to find mysterious masters in India, to acquire strange parapsychological qualities, or to find curious and hidden manuscripts with magic secrets. The word occultism does not define unknown knowledge, but a teaching which is hidden due to human stupidity, snobbery, superficiality, fantasy, and lack of state of higher awareness. It is due to this that at many times lacking the abracadabra, the student feels cheated as he expected magic. But what is the general concept of magic? Magic is the food of hope for lazy people who believe it is sufficient to learn tricks or attain certain powers to be able to reach the fulfillment of their desire through magic without any effort whatsoever. This is to say, they visualize the magic art as an arbitrary exercise, a procedure in which the world and nature would be subject to the whims of the desires of the magician. We must now disillusion them as that which is arbitrary does not exist in the universe. And should it exist, it would bring about the destruction of the cosmos. People are horrified by effort, and therefore easy magic has an extraordinary attraction for the unwary. Paraphrasing the concept of Hermes Trismegistus of as above, so below. The attainment of something physical or material entails work, time, and effort. This is also true for Hermeticism, an art in which only after a long process of initiation is it possible to take the first steps. Nevertheless, we must not forget that the effort required is always relative to the importance of the goal being pursued. And we know of no higher or more noble goal than to be converted into the true human being with higher spiritual qualities. Many people identify magic with parapsychological abilities, believing that the highest goal of occultism consists in developing PSI powers. They are misguided by the virtue of their complete lack of knowledge about true occultism, whose spiritual goals are neither temporal nor relative, but rather are infinite, eternal, and absolute, transcending material, historical eras, life, and death. All right, and that ends chapter 4, and we'll pick up on chapter 5, to be or not to be, the next time I See you guys. So I hope you guys enjoyed chapter 4. And until next time, I hope you have a favorable and beautiful day.